Welcome once again, everyone. On behalf of Hyderabad Literary Festival, I welcome you all to our first online event. Hopefully, this is the first of many such events, the details of which you will receive very soon from us. And I'm Vijay Kumar, one of the directors of Hyderabad Literary Festival. And this evening, we are going to have a discussion on Telugu literature. But I also would like to remind everyone that we are absolutely aware of the fact that we cannot cover a literature of nearly 1 millennium in the 30 minutes that we have. So we have no such pretensions. What we are trying to do is to give a kind of a snapshot of Telugu literature. And so I invite our two speakers for this evening, Dr. Srinivas Reddy. He teaches at Brown University and IIT Gandhinagar, and Dr. Afsar Mohammad. And Afsar teaches at Pennsylvania State University and University of Pennsylvania. And all of you, I'm sure, would have received the invitation where we have given a brief bio of both the speakers. Srinivas Reddy has just come out with his wonderful biography of Krishnadevaraya, and I request Srini to please show the cover.
Yeah.
And congrats, Srini. This is Srini's latest book, which is coincidentally, getting globally released today.
Yes.
There was an online release earlier, and congratulations, Srini, and all the very best.
Thank you so much.
And this is Srinivas Reddy's latest book, but before this, he has already translated Krishnadevaraya's Amuktamalyada, and he has also translated Kalidasa. Malavikagnimitram is one of them. So Srini basically lives in the past. And Afsar Mohammad, of course, is Afsar. Everybody knows he's a very well-known Telugu poet, critic, and of course, an academic. Afsar has already published several volumes of his trend-setting poetry, and his literary criticism is very, very well known. And he has one of the books that I would recommend to everybody to look at is his work on the Sufi poets in Telugu. Please, Afsar, can I request you to please show the cover if you can? Closer, please. Yeah, lovely.
Wow.
Yeah, you can see, this is about the Sufi tradition in Telugu. And thank you, Afsar. Thank you both Srini and Afsar for joining us this evening. And roughly what I'll do is that I'll first ask one question, both of you can respond to it, and then we will, as things flow. So let us begin with the very title which we have given to this session, Telugu Literature Classic Modern. So I would like both of you to respond to the question whether these categories are appropriate or even helpful in understanding Telugu literature. Because one of the things that is very often accused whenever we talk about Indian literature is that we very often adopt and impose Western literatures. So, Srini, your response first.
Thank you so much, Vijay. I just want to say thank you to you also for being just a wonderful human being and scholar and bringing us all together. This is a joy. So, and I think the last point that you made is maybe where I'd start is this: the discourse on the Telugu language is in English. Our ideas are in English. Our ideas come from an understanding of a Western epistemology. So our starting point is already classical modernity. But in another way, categories are just categories, like we all know. They're helpful to the extent to which they're helpful, and then we must discard them to understand new things. But they take us to new perspectives. And as you said, I live in the past, which is a wonderful place. But so is the present, and so is the future. You know, all of it, because there's all the same themes. And if I could add one comment to this, to just for us to think about, is in terms of our scholarship, if we look back to our own theoretical traditions within India, then we have such a rich amount of material, in fact, richer than anything else when it comes to literary theory, if you really think about it. So one thing that whenever I put in those kind of large, dichotomous structures, classical, modern, tradition, innovation, whatever, so the old Maya Desi thing is the thing that always pops to my mind. And those kinds of large pillars of theory that we have that play out in so many different ways. So I think as we think about all of those discussions, and have a pleasure to do that, I would think, I always kind of translate back to those things. How were these guys thinking about it in the past? They were dealing with the same issues. What was identity? What did language mean? What was a high form? What was a low form? What had stature? What had power? What had political clout? All of these are old ideas. So we're just continuing a conversation that's been going on. And I think if we listen to those old Indian words and thoughts about it, we might have better insight into our situation rather than always kind of importing some of the Western ideas, which of course are also necessary because we're so influenced by that. So
I'll come back to that, question that you, point that made, but I would like Afsar to respond to the question, whether these are useful, appropriate, and because you, in a way, at least in this discussion, you represent modernity, or as you is very trend-setting. It brought a new kind of insights into Telugu literature. So I would like you to respond to this question about whether these categories are useful or appropriate, or are there any better alternatives?
Thank you so much, Vijay. I just started calling you Vijay Maharshi, which I want to establish. And I'm so happy Srini is here with me. And this is a wonderful audience here. I'm so happy, and I would love to continue this dialogue. And then coming back to returning to your idea, I just want to begin with how the concept of time works, whether it is in Western context or Eastern context. Because this idea of classic and modernity, it is so connected to the concept of time, right? So in my language classes, when I teach grammar, even Telugu grammar, both classical and modern, I always talk about this concept of time, past, present, and future. And then interesting, in Telugu grammar, modern Telugu grammar at least, we never use this idea of present tense. We always say it is a progressive tense. So that means time is a constant flow. It's a flow of present, progressive, and future. So all these three ideas are so connected, and there is no way that you can separate them one from each other. Similarly, classic and modernity. Where do you end classic? Where do you begin modernity? This is such an overlapping category. And then in the context of Telugu particularly, of course, that's a very elaborate debate about modernity in Western context. But we in Telugu context particularly, after all this recent debates about whether Telugu is a classical language or not, so now we are more interested in, excited about claiming our classical roots. So we just want to prove that we are better than other languages. We are more like ancient other languages. I don't know where this goes, but I don't see any use in such debate. But in my world,
sorry, go ahead.
This is about, and I will return to this question again during the discussion. I have so much to unpack there.
Correct. In fact, something that you said, Afsar, is very interesting about Telugu being classical, because in the academia, for example, we have a category called modern languages, under which we study Telugu, Hindi, etc.
Right.
And we continue to study Telugu literature under modern language, or what is called ML.
Right.
And then we have a category called classical languages, in which we study Sanskrit and Arabic, Persian, etc.
Yeah.
And now, after claiming Telugu as a classical language, we continue to study it under modern language.
Right.
But the question that you raised about time is very interesting.
Right.
Time as a continuum,
right.
As an ever flowing stream. But apart from chronology, if we go by, for example, the prominent trends. For example, Telugu literature is very often divided into Anuvada Yugam. Then you have Prabandha Yugam and so on and so forth, where it is not so much chronology based, but the dominant trends based. So is that one way in which we can classify, Srini?
Well, I mean, in a certain sense, yes. I mean, and like we all do acknowledge these categories are important. So, for example, I mean, the thing I've been talking about lately a lot is, this period of Raya, for example, that peak, 1500. Okay, so Anuvadam period ayipindi. Ipudu Prabandham has reached its apex. So an apex is what? I've been thinking a lot about this. You like the summer solstice, right? That's like the apex. You think it's perfect summer, hot, very good. But what the solstice represents is the peak. From then on, the day is going to grow shorter. The day is going to go down from there. And after Raya, all of that classical stuff goes down. And basically, once the colonial period starts, and you could argue that that's where modernity starts, you could argue it happened earlier, whatever. Those are all debates useless, but I mean, useless for fun. But the point is, there is no doubt that there was a functional epistemological shift that happened in the Indian scholastic mind during this period. We had basically a slow decline of this whole knowledge system, right? That's the thing that is important to
you would trace it back to the 16th century, Srini?
No, the end, more like the 17th century, 18th, let's say, that period. I mean, that's when you see it declining, and then by now, like you said, even though we're at the useless state where we can claim a classical status, but we don't actually do any classical studies. Those pundits are gone. Where are the guys who can recite from Amuktamalyada, Manucharitram, Vemana, Anni, Ekkanenchi, Akkanenchi? They're just gone, man. And it's just a sad reality we have to face. So in a sense, the classical tradition...
I would like to take it. Correct. I would like to take it across to Afsar to speculate about why that happened. Why classical became almost like kind of an obscurantist and something that people would like to avoid.
Good. Great question. Yeah, great question, Srini. I am so happy to get into this tensions between classic and modernity. Of course, I don't subscribe to those two ideas because I have like basic concern about the very idea of periodization, Yuga Vibhajana, based on the dominant trends. So when you are saying or underlining the dominant, you are obviously representing some dominant ideas, right? Yeah. So you are actually subscribing to that mainstream ideology. So I don't want to fall into the trap of periodization and dominant cultures. Rather, we need to understand that even though you say Anuvada Yuga or Prabandha Yuga, those periods were not just confined to translations or Prabandhas, right? Sorry, I am getting into this other area, Srini's area. I'm not like you mentioned.
But you're exactly correct. What you're saying is 100% correct.
Right. So when you're talking or emphasizing that it was Anuvada Yuga, you are actually rejecting the independent skills of Adi, Kavi, Nanaya, Tikkana, Erana. And then I particularly enjoy reading even now Tikkana, who is so close to Telugu idiom and Telugu cultures. Where do you locate Tikkana's tradition within this Anuvada Yuga?
No,
And
in fact,
yeah.
Afsar, if I can add, I have actually written about this, and I said that what we call Anuvada Yugam, a lot of original writing actually took place in that era.
Of course.
And what we call, Kavya Yugam, etc.
Right.
That's when it has actually become much more enslaved.
Right.
Correct.
Because it became so dependent on Sanskrit that the age of creativity actually turned out to be the age of enslavement. And whereas what we call, and of course the entire idea, entire understanding of translation as imitation is something that is completely alien to us.
Right. Yeah.
Anuvadam means innovation in India. I think point to, any Anuvadam that's worth to be a translation has to be innovative.
Yeah, exactly. It is called Anusrujana, right?
Correct. Real, again, creating the whole thing.
Yeah.
It's a creative thing.
Yeah.
That's why Tikkana, like you mentioned, is so unique and important.
Right. Yeah.
And in fact, since Afsar mentioned Nannaya, if you go back and see what Rajarajan and Narendra asked him to do, and what Nannaya agreed to do, neither of them used the word Anuvadam.
No, never.
Right. Because Rajarajan and Narendra said Teluginchudi. Right. And so Telugize it rather than translate it. I wonder whether the word Anuvadam or translate existed in that period at all.
No, never.
Yeah.
Anuvadam was not even like a concept in our classic aesthetics. You don't find that anywhere in either Sanskrit aesthetics or Telugu. If there is any Telugu classic aesthetics, you don't find that.
No.
It's a very like Western like product. We just have wonderful, what I call even now, Anusrujana practices. If you compare original, if there is any original text of Mahabharata or Ramayana, that's another debate. Compare those like Sanskrit texts and then what we call mother texts, Ur text, and then like these texts composed by Telugu poets, including Molla's Ramayana. So you see like a wonderful tradition of transcreating those ideas and then creating their own story, locating it, local idiom. So I see, like, Srini could speak more about it. So all this actually culminated in Amuktamalyada, where Sri Krishnadevaraya was obviously trying to get into this debate about local idiom and trying to really use that idiom in his kavya.
Yeah, and so if I connect that to Srini, Srini, you have always said that Krishnadevaraya's humble origins were probably one of the reasons why actually he did not go the Sanskrit way.
Right.
Definitely.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
This is kind of what Afsar is also talking about.
Right.
Anytime we look at large trends, dominant narratives, we also have to look at, again, what are the things that we didn't hear, because there was plenty of interesting stuff going on. Raya is interesting because he straddles all of those things.
Right.
And it really is like a singular type of work.
Right.
But gosh, there's so many things that were raised that I wanted to comment on. But Vijay, why don't you put us back on track? And
Okay. Let me ask Srini. If we take classical as a category, even if we don't agree with it, and if it is a kind of a useful distinguishing category rather than rather than a adversary category. If we take classical as a category, then who would you say exemplifies those qualities? Classical, whether it is drama or poetry or whatever.
You're saying in Telugu literature, who would I point to as the ultimate pinnacle? Pita, you have to like the guy. But there's all large discourse. Krishnadevaraya, great poet, great court, his poet laureate, Peddana, all the pinnacle of Telugu literature. So what I'm also conveying is the mythology that has come with all of this literature over time, that 17th, 18th century building up all this kind of stuff. So Peddana represents that probably in the classical way. But, when I think, for me right now, what I would like to work on in the classical vein is someone like Joshua. Joshua, to me, is a fully classical poet, and in such a powerfully modern way, as you all well know. So, the classical stream is something that continues into the chronological, present. I don't know how many people are still writing in that vein in a really productive way, like in a creative way, the way that Joshua did. But I don't know much about the current classical scene in Telugu, but that would be someone who I would also put in that category for me as great poet.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Joshua's Dalit poetry and connecting it to the classical.
See, I would not call it Dalit poetry. That's the point. You see, this is another category. Yeah. Joshua is Joshua, man. You read him, and there's more than just Dalit stuff there. It's a man who's talking about the human condition in such an immensely personal way, but he's doing it in the highest form of this language to compete with people like Satyanarayana, Vishwanatha, who is the other Mahakavi of classical form, our modern time. He's on par with that kind of a poet, but in a totally radical we Ventine Dalit poetry on it problem. Or that's the problem with Telugu literature right now. Complete category: feminist literature, Dalit literature, Maoist literature, literature. Telugu, man. Let us all try to put it together. That's what we're all here for. So anyway, sorry.
I think that's something that I would like to take it to Afsar, because this is also something that has been said about Sri Sri.
Right.
That Sri Sri's radicalism being what it is. But look at his understanding of classical literature.
Of course.
So, like I asked Srini Afsar, who would you identify as one or two major modern, let us say, modern writers? Like for example, Srini said Peddana. In terms of modern Telugu writing, who would you identify as, if not pioneer, definitely who exemplify modern Telugu literature?
Right, perfect. Okay, Maharishi Vijay and other friends really have a problem with this of example, giving example for certain things, because even in classical times or in modern times, wherever you study literature closely and try to understand problematics, like identifying just few people as the representatives of that particular period or history. But even for me, even Sri Sri is not a best example. And then Joshua, not a perfect example. Gorjada is not a perfect example. There are other things happening, but because of this periodization, we are kind of forced to give some examples and then make some texts like wonderful examples.
Why don't you tell us two poets that you really feel inspired by?
I basically see anything happening within the literary culture, it is a it's like a situation where multiple representatives work. And then during the time period when Sri was writing, there was so much happening. And then because of leftist politics, and then we had this urgency to claim one person Mahakavi, we kind of ran into this trap and started calling Sri Mahakavi. I being a literary historian, cultural historian, I don't want to like give that title to Sri. I want to see it as a movement, historical movement, where people were in dialogue with so many aspects of modernity. Like you have like Progressive Writers Association, like introduced this progressivism, but which actually doesn't fit exactly into this big idea of modernity, right? And then also after Sri, we continued similar kind of mode in understanding literature. So we got to get rid of these like ideal figures, break the tradition, and start thinking in terms of not the persons but the historical movements. Then only you understand the exact situation of that particular period. Because we started highlighting Sri, we actually now blind to everything else happening in 1930s, 40s, and 50s.
Afsar garu, tell us a few poets from 1930s. I want to know myself. I want to also learn.
See, yeah, in fact, whether you call them classical, modern, or whatever it is, we would like to know from your point of view, you know, 2 or 3 major writers. For example, if somebody like you know, Srini, who says he's not very familiar with what's happening in the current Telugu scene, if he wants to know, or if somebody who is like me, who is completely out of touch with the you know, what is happening currently, we would like to know who would you point out. I understand that we cannot just choose 1 or 2. Right. But what I'm saying is that there are always, writers, whether it is personal or not is a different issue. But who would you choose?
Okay, good question. And then that takes me to do some self-promotion here. Sorry about it.
Kya baat hai?
Okay.
So this is the book. This is the book I published in 1992, Adhunikata, Atyadhunikata, which is actually one of the beginning points of postmodernism. It was 1992 exactly. Beginning points of the postmodernist idea, but I never used the term postmodernism in this book. I just called it extreme modernity, Atyadhunikata. In this book, I analyzed other trends beyond Sri's tradition. I particularly focused on Narayan Babu, Ajanta, Vairagi, and then you can see like I wrote a preface like how these categories like labeling certain people like dominant figures like obscures the very idea of historicity of literature. And then in the book, I focused on concepts rather than figures. But I still believe, along with Sri, during that period, we need to understand poets such as Narayan Babu. And then in 50s, along with other poets like Kundurti or frivolous practices, we need to understand what poets such as Vairagi were doing. And then later in 60s, we need to understand along with other poets, even we're still talking about Kundurti in 60s. And then we need to understand what actually Vachana Kavita did in creating an entirely new set of poets. And then in the 70s, we just focused on revolutionary poetry. What happened to other trends?
So you would rather focus on the era rather than one individual writers. And I suppose all writers are products of that particular
yes, exactly.
era, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I just want to say that.
I think.
Yeah. That's great. Maybe we should work on putting together collections of different poets of an era. That would be a great thing.
Yeah.
Vijay, me darshno.
Yeah.
Also, I have another concern, Vijay Maharshi and Srini and other friends. I just want to bring this to the table. See, why you should talk about just poets all the time when you are talking about classics and modernity? What is happening with other prose writers are there, in particularly who started in even before 1990, right?
Yeah.
Why not why don't you consider prose writers Maha Vachana Rachayita, Yuga Vachana Rachayita? Why don't you create such categories and call them right? So this is what we are doing here. We are still stuck in that idea of Yuga Vibhajana, and then all the history, Telugu history particularly, written from the lens of poetry, which actually obscure many other forms.
Is that because it is probably the most dominant genre?
Yeah, that is again problematic. No, Vijay Maharshi.
Right.
How do you call poetry a dominant tradition? What was happening in Gurjada's time? Why he was writing short story? Why he was writing a drama? And then why he was writing wonderful prose pieces? Why should we talk just about Purnama Kadha, Muchala Saralu? What is it is a very small world. Poetry is a very small world, Vijay Maharshi.
In fact, what you are saying, goes against the general perception that very often fiction gets,
marginalized.
Fiction is overshadowing all other genres.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. So, is that a problem? I mean, that when we focus on one particular genre and obviously others get marginalized.
Yeah, that is what happened with historiography, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is,
yes, Srini, you were saying something?
Host has stopped my video.
Okay.
Now he's asked me to start it. Okay.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I just think maybe we could pause for a second, take a step back, and it's so wonderful. There's 75 some people here. On one side you hear people talking about the greatness of Telugu, blah blah blah. But let us be honest, we have a very inverse proportionality with the richness of the tradition and the engagement of our community, that is the Telugu speaking world. We don't have a culture of reading. We don't have a culture of knowing this stuff. So even these discussions about this person or this person, we need to create that base of a readership. And I hope we can do more of these kinds of things. I mean, I think there are Telugu people there that are interested and they do read and are excited about it. Let us try to build that. And so we can all learn about all of this. So I think something,
something is going wrong.
It's okay.
But no, I think this is a much larger debate, Srini, what you were saying about reading culture and debating culture, healthy discussions.
Yeah. No, I'm just saying maybe we could switch over to some audience participation.
Yes.
Also.
Yes. Okay, I'll take the first question. This is to Srini. His comment about Gurram Joshua being, if not continuing, but being still very much rooted in the classical tradition. What examples can you give? Why would you call that?
Well, I mean, just on what we were just talking about, he writes poetry. He writes in a classical form with classical chandas, with a classical diction. A classical form, a way of doing things that is completely in that vein. I mean, he's a classical writer. There, from a literary perspective, that is what he is.
Yeah. And
but his themes, the funny thing is, he'll take a theme. Just give a small example of what I'm trying to get at. He'll take a theme like, Aduta Kavya, Meghadutam, the great, it's a whole genre of literature. right?
Right.
What he's able to do, and he's doing it intentionally with that form,
Correct.
because he's still at that stage that says, hey, I can do it just as well as you can. That's why someone like Sri, who comes from a Brahmin community, might already have that in him and can then do all his, more innovative stuff or break away from tradition. But Joshua was in that period where he had to say what he had to say, and to make it clear and loud, he said it in that classical form.
And this is a question to Afsar. In the name of modern literature, do we want classical or any other literatures to be pushed into oblivion? And why can we not, as you said, why cannot we see literatures as a continuous flow rather than sacrifice one for the sake of the other?
Great question. I really like this question. Actually, this is again the problem with the periodization and then identifying the history with dominant traditions. So about the overlappings between classical and modernity. So where do you locate Viswanatha Satyanarayana and his satirical writing? It's not like Ramayana Kalpavriksam. He what about other places like I am just forgetting that like all his satire and comedy kind of works. And then there are also English law English law translations kuda vachai. And then where do you locate Gurujada and poetry and Kanyasulkam? And then, but the big question for me is like, I actually don't want to subscribe to this division of classic versus modernity, because it's really like, it's not, there is no use you dividing it into two separate domains. That is not how literature works. That is not how literary texts work. And then in modern times, you have Betavolu, Ram Brahma, Hanumanla Bhumaya, and all these poets using classical meters and writing about modern themes. Then do we call classic poets modern poets?
Yeah.
So it's like there's a problem with the categorization itself. And then there's a problem with periodization.
Yes. See, there is also, we must also acknowledge the fact of certain writers asserting themselves to be a particular kind of writer. For example, one of the questions says that Joshua himself Joshua called himself a Dalit poet. And how can you erase his Dalitness by calling him, universal or whatever?
Oh, I wasn't erasing his Dalitness. I'm sorry if that came across that way. I was just saying that when we label him as a Dalit poet, when we give that moniker to him, the first thing that comes to a person's mind when they hear Joshua is, oh, Dalit poet. That to me is a limiting aspect. I'm not erasing Dalitness. I'm saying that Dalitness is only one part of Joshua.
That's it.
That is what I'm saying.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And also, one of the questions is that, agreed that categories sometimes can be very limiting, but is categorization not convenient in order to understand?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I said right at the beginning of this whole thing. So they take us to a different perspective. And maybe that perspective gives us new categories to talk about, and that's what keeps academics in business. And that's what we do, and that's really how intellectual traditions evolve and grow. It's always going back to what was happening, reacting to that, moving forward. Just like that stream that I think Afsar's point about the Telugu tense. This goes back to old Dravidian too. I mean, Tamil, it's like there's past and then there's everything else. So present and future are one continuous action. You can understand that something happened in the past, but everything else it's basically like then or now. right? And so even then is like, you know, for example, Telugu, my teacher used to always joke about, you know, George used to say, you know, when a Telugu person goes and tells his friend that they saw a movie, they'll tell like, you know, ikkadikellaru appudu tinnaru akkadekellaru, you know, it's always like this progressive, it's like the movie's happening right there. And the best part is, in India, we tell everything to the very end of the story. We give all the way to the ending. In America, if you give it away, they say, hey, you told the ending. In India, it's not like that because it's about time. We don't care about the ending. This story is going to go back around again. You know the ending, it doesn't matter. It's how you're getting to that ending, how you're experiencing that ending over and over again. That is the joy. That is why Ramayana, Mahabharata keep going over and over. It's still a joy. You know, next time we do a whole conference on Ramayana, Mahabharata, I'll be there in 2 seconds.
That will be a Mahabharata itself.
Right.
Vinte Garal Tinali, Vinte Bharatam Vinali.
Right.
Yes. One of the things, you know, a non-Telugu reader is asking is that why is it that, you know, Telugu gets such low visibility in terms of even within India? Why is it that non-Telugu readers don't get to know much about? And the questioner also asks if you have to recommend some works that need to be read, what each of you would recommend.
Afsar Garu?
You want to? Okay, good. So that's also a very important question, particularly for a person who is teaching in Western academia, then addressing the needs of American students who are really interested in learning more about Telugu literature and Telugu cultures. I teach modern Indian literature. I teach South Asian novel here at University of Pennsylvania, but I mostly use what you call like dominant languages, like Urdu all the time.
Why?
And then I actually try to like introduce out of 15 weeks, I actually devote 2 weeks for Telugu, 1 week for Tamil, and then like this. I kind of make that division for like teaching purposes. But the problem is we don't have really good translations from whether it is classical text or modern text. We don't have really good translations into English. And then even if you have translations, they're not good for an American classroom, American artists. So we need to understand how translation works in a modern context. So translators should have more opportunities to work together, to do workshops on translations, and then we need to promote this idea of like, okay, we need to address non-Telugu audience, not those not confined to like a frog in the well to this small literary world of Telugu. So go beyond it. So that is only happening in a very limited way. And the second aspect is how many scholars are out there in non-Telugu literary sphere working on like promoting Telugu literature. We don't have, when you compare with Kannada, Tamil, Malayalam, our library languages, or like Hindi, Urdu. I just read even now Ghalib's translations, like hundreds of Ghalib translations even now in English. How many people like translated Petana into English? Not even a single person. And then how many people translated Sataka literature into English? No. And then how many people, are there any good translations of Vayamana? Is there any good translation of Tikkana? So we need to create a team of translators. Otherwise, this won't move forward.
I'm with you, Afsar Garu. There are, but you know, Peddana has been translated. You know, Narayana Rao Garu and Schulman and all these people have done some work, and even Hank Heifetz worked on Durjati Shatakam.
Right.
But anyway, it's very limited, and I don't want to get into
limited.
Big discussion about this, but I do feel I have to maybe reiterate the point, and since we do have an audience, and it's important to state. The truth of the matter is, what I was saying before, We have to build that readership. We have to build a cultural value for our language and our literature, which we as a Telugu people, if you want to identify that way, we simply don't have. I mean, if you compare it to the Tamil kind of appreciation of the language, and what that translates into for us and for the community is they put money into creating departments. They endow chairs at universities.
Limitation.
They do. Manawalu will give to Venkateshwara, lakhs, totalist now, Venkateshwara. But, started, there's no Telugu program in America. There's like 5 people that work on it. There's 100 Azhar guys working on Bengali and all these other literatures, but it's because Bengalis love their literature. We have to support this. Vijay has been leading a good effort for all these many years, and we're all here to support, and let us do more of these so that it'll grow like that. More translations will come. It'll work.
Yeah, translations is again a very big, issue itself. Very often, not just Telugu, but I suppose not in almost all Indian languages. Of course, there is no what we call standard operating procedures. Each one to himself or herself. So it's a kind of an unregulated market. And particularly, both of you are right about first building up a resource and then bemoaning the lack of attention to it, because today, even if one wants to pay attention, there is hardly any resources available. Srinivas mentioned translations of Peddana, etc. But and Srini himself has done Amuktamalyada, but also somehow the visibility factor is something probably we don't promote our own literature better, and also again one of the questions which is not unexpected, that why is this discussion about Telugu literature not happening in Telugu?
ఇప్పుడు ఈ చాట్ బాక్స్ లో అందరూ వెస్టర్నైజేషన్ ఏదో అడుగుతున్నారు. అదే పాయింట్, అసలు మన భాష మనదే కాదు. ఇప్పుడు
తెలుగు మాట్లాడదాం నిజంగా, తెలుగులో మాట్లాడితే
but there is a reason why we do not do it in Telugu. The whole idea is that it's not a conversation between people who already know this domain. Right? We also need, I'm not saying this is either or. It can be both this as well as that. But again, as Afsar said, this kind of limiting oneself, mana daggara, very soon, very easily we give titles. Vishwa Vikhyata, right? What is Vishwam? Knowing yourself or being known within the small domain does not make you a Vishwa Vikhyata and all that. So I think our concept of the world has to be much broader than what we already are comfortable in.
Correct.
Right? We need to take our literature into a zone that is uncomfortable to us. And it's a domain that we need to contest for our space. It's not being comfortable in a space that is already earmarked for us. As Afsar said, we have to compete with, let's say, Tamil literature, Malayalam literature, Kannada literature, and then, we can say that, we demand this space for us. So discussing Telugu literature within Telugu, of course, it is important, and I'm sure lots of things are already happening there. But we also need to take it outside and also talk about it. And I think we have about 5 minutes more. And
Antenna.
final thoughts.
It's so
Final
quick.
thoughts from.
I just feel like I just started.
Well, this is what happens with professional academics. That once they start, it is very difficult to stop them.
I know.
So,
We need to have like part 2 of this.
Yeah.
Maybe in Telugu.
And also, please remember, how the poor students must be suffering, when they face us, when we don't want to stop even after 1 hour.
No. Yeah, of course. Vijay Maharshi, that won't work in American classroom.
Okay.
In American classroom, professors won't talk much.
I know.
They just facilitate the debate. Students do a lot of talking.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
No, but Vijay, I want to go back to the point you were making just quickly for us, if I might.
Yeah.
I mean, basically, I think if I understood what you're saying or how I'm understanding, you see, Telugu and English cannot be separated at this point in history anymore.
Yeah.
You see, we're having the discussion in Telugu. Even if so, we have two things. One is a Telugu readership. It's people that sit around and read Telugu books. I'll be honest, I actually don't do that. I read those old texts, yes, but I read scholarly works in English about Telugu. I don't sit around reading Telugu poetry. I mean, I just don't. And I think there's a lot of people that don't. And I think probably a lot of people online here probably read in English, maybe more than they do in Telugu. So that's one issue. And then the issue then becomes, so you have a low readership, but then you still want great poetry and great literature to be produced. So you have a Kavi kind of appearing out of nowhere, let's say, or a poet or a writer. And even if he does get or she gets well known, they have to be translated into English to even be accepted and acknowledged at all. So there's this inextricable link that we have between these two languages at this point that makes it impossible to actually separate out even a Telugu versus English literary. Telugu is a Telugu English literary tradition at this stage.
Yeah. And also, apart from readership, and this is the last comment that I would like Afsar to make about, a healthy critical atmosphere. Apart from readership, we also need a vibrant, critical culture, culture of criticism. So do you think that that's something that is missing?
Yes, totally. One thing, because, you remember what happened in the beginnings of, when Gurujada started writing, or when Sri Sri started writing, or in the context of Hyderabadi history, when there was a movement for Telugu Renaissance, Telangana Renaissance in late 40s, what they were doing, Suravaram Pratap Reddy, persons like Suravaram Pratap Reddy and then Vatikot Alvar Swami. So we need to remember them, and then we need to understand what kind of models they provided to spread the value of literature and to promote the idea of literature even among the audience, popular people, right? So I actually even now remember what Vatikota Alvar Swami did. He actually carried a gampa, a basket of books, even to the remote villages and then circulated the books there. How many people? We have this wonderful printing presses with very advanced technology, and then we have wonderful media around us. We have teaching classes in language and literature, and then why can't we do what people like Suravaram Pratap Reddy, Vatikota Alvar Swami did during their lifetime? That is a big question for me. That is, I see this as a lack of commitment and passion for language and literature. It's not about lack of leadership. It's not about we have people out there who are interested in reading and learning about language and literature. We just, as writers and critics, we are big failures. And then we don't have enough patience, tolerance, and then critical tools to go into the masses. Even not mass means this is not like Bollywood movie or Bahubali. I don't expect that kind of response there. But I just want to go to that moment of 40s in Hyderabad when Vatikota Suravaram Pratap Reddy, all these people were working and promoting Telugu Renaissance.
Library movement and all that.
So
the library movement.
So you know this Krishnadevaraya Andhra Bhasha Nilayam in Hyderabad.
Why? Yeah.
They were doing. They started their own private libraries. They didn't ask money from governments. They didn't go for NGOs. They just started with their own money. Even in Telangana, if you go to villages, you find so many private libraries.
Yes.
Why?
Yeah.
So we need to have that commitment. We need to have that passion. Yes, this is my language. I want to die for this. I just want to die for this. Though I don't expect any profits. I don't expect any benefits. I don't expect any awards. I love my language. I die for my culture. Why?
Yeah.
That is the commitment we need to have.
Yeah, thank you very much, both of you. Yeah. I'm sure this is the first of hopefully many other events. And it's not necessary that HLF should be the only forum that we can discuss that.
Right.
And for all those questions which we cannot address, I apologize once again. I've tried my best to scroll down as many questions as possible. Many of them are comments, many of them are personal remarks.
Yeah, I see the chat box.
So I thank you once again, both Srinivas and Afsar.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
And once again, congratulations, Srini, and all the best for your Raya book. And Afsar Garu, we will see you more.
Yes, thank you. So, to use Srini's classical term, this is just Krutyada Vasta. I mean, this is just Adi.
Correct.
Exactly.
And as you said, there is no division between the past, the present, and the future.
Yeah, so this is going, exactly. Very good.
This is going. So, what is today probably will flow into tomorrow.
Yes, sure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Once again, I thank all the participants for their wonderful questions. And I'm again sorry that we could not take more questions. We did as many as possible. And also, it was very difficult for me to both listen to what the speakers are saying and also to look at the questions that were coming. So I may have missed some very important questions, but of course, we have the chat box and both the speakers will look at that. And thank you very much. And I hope to see all our wonderful audience once again at our next HLF event, the details of which you will receive very soon. Thank you very much. And good morning to the speakers and good night to everybody in India. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.